Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. I'm your host, Kristen Harcourt, and I'm excited for another really, really good conversation. This time, we're going to have two guests on the show, and I'm going to be speaking with Chris Edmonds and Mark S. Babbitt, who are the authors of Good Comes First: How Today's Leaders Create an Uncompromising Company Culture That Doesn't Suck. And I'm going to hold up the book here right now. Because I really, really love the book, and there's going to be some really rich discussion on it in the podcast today, but I highly recommend it. It's really, really well done. But let me give you a little bit of background on the guests. So Chris is a author and executive consultant who helps senior leaders create and sustain purposeful, positive, productive workplaces. So all of you on the show know that I talk about this all the time. It feels like my language as well. So we're 100% aligned there, Chris. And Mark is the president of WorqIQ, a consultancy focused on transforming leadership, building good comes first, company cultures, and developing workplace intelligence. He's also the founder and CEO of YouTern, a community focused on helping young careerists get their first or next internship or job. So important. Welcome to the show, Chris and Mark.
Thank you very much, Kristen. We're delighted to be here.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you, Kristen.
So, as a starting point, this book, Good Comes First, and I know, Mark, I think you've written other books before, and I know, Chris, you have as well. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, what was the catalyst? Because, putting a book together, it's a little bit of work. It's not easy. What was the catalyst for you to really deciding to write this book together and get it out into the world?
Chris stalked me until I said yes. No, that's not true. We actually sat down, Chris and I had known each other for a long time on social media, but had never met before. And we found ourselves in Chicago at the same time and spent some time at a culture conference and dinner afterwards. And the conversation started way back then. But we had just released our own books, our own individual books then. And it was, it seemed like writing a new book was a long time away, and it turned out it was. And then we actually started writing, 3 years ago, Chris?
Yeah.
And almost done. And the pandemic hits, and it changes everything about the workplace. And people start to become more reflective of their current positions and wondering if this culture is really right for them. And so we kind of had to go back to the drawing board and include some more contemporary thoughts and encourage leaders to do even more than what we were doing now, because it was clear it was never more important. We to our credit, Chris, we kind of anticipated this whole great resignation thing. We told people, if you don't fix this, people are going to walk. And so it was interesting. And this, Kristen, by the time you submit a manuscript to the publisher, and from that point till the time it actually publishes, then it takes 9 months to a year. And that whole 9 months to a year, Chris and I are both going, come on, release it. they're talking about this stuff right now. So it was a fun ride, and it was a joy to work with Chris on this.
Well, and if I can say, both Mark and I, with our previous books, I wrote mine as a solo author, and it's fascinating, sitting in an office like this one and deciding, I know what I'm going to write a book about. This is brilliant, and then the next day going, oh, this is even more brilliant. Well, in a vacuum, you can be convinced that you're brilliant and you're missing the mark. And so what is very cool about our work together, Mark has a wonderful editor's mind and a wonderful, very creative mind around inspiring leaders. And we were able to really merge together very well, because sometimes the co-author thing can be more of a battle, right? Literally, than it is really a joint venture. And this was really fun. And I think the other piece that was critical is we went with Matt Holt Books, part of Ben Bella Books. I'd known Matt as the publisher of Wiley way back when in 2014 with my book, The Culture Engine. And Matt was so gracious and so excited and was literally building his imprint. He says we were one of the first contracts they signed. So it was wonderful to have a publisher that really got it, that really understood the impact of, if leaders don't change the way these work cultures operate, they're going to be very depressed.
Yeah. Well, and I was so glad when I read the book, because I didn't know in terms of timing if maybe it had been written before the pandemic, and there's so much rich information and data to share, and perhaps even a different lens to look at some of these things that people couldn't sometimes, until you've experienced things. I think of all the workplaces that said, no, we can't possibly work from home. No. Now it's like, well, we've dispelled this myth for many organizations. So I was so glad that the timing worked out, that you were able to speak through this. And, as a starting point as well, when it comes to the title, Good Comes First, like you explain really well in the book what that means, because I think also, I'm curious actually both of your interpretations of this. And I really loved when you talk through the foundation of this. It feels like sometimes people are weighted a little bit too far on one side, right? All of the heart, the compassion, but not as much on the business results and accountability, or sometimes a little bit more on the other side, right? All business results. We've seen that for many years. And so I like the way that you marry it. So talk to us a little bit more. Maybe Mark, you want to start with, what does good comes first really mean as a philosophy?
Well, first, let me say that we didn't even know what we had in the title or in the theme. We actually had a third party go to us and read our book proposal and say, first of all, your title sucks, and your title's actually in the first paragraph of your book proposal, and you just didn't know it. And that turned out to be Good Comes First, because from the time sitting in that Chicago restaurant, Chris and I knew that in these divisive times, and back then it was just the polarization society had just started way back then, but we could see it with the political leadership changing and the different sets of morals and values that were on display. Now we could see this very divisive time coming, and Chris and I both realized we really need to talk about the good of people and the good of teams and the good of the potential good in companies, because all we care about is results. And often that turns into a win at all costs scenario within company cultures, or you could be a total jerk, but if you're the top sales performer, then you get to stay, where somebody who is really just fully engaged in the culture and is a good mentor and a good teammate, but maybe not so good as your top performer, they might be asked to leave. And that just seemed completely backwards to us. And I will say this, and Chris, I know you'll want to talk about this more, but we also realized that we couldn't compel leaders to care any more about workplace respect, enabling that, just this pleasant, positive, productive culture. We couldn't go that route without also talking about results, because then you get this kumbaya culture that feels good, and you have your nap pods and your ping pong tables and your foosball, tables, but nothing gets done. And so we're both practical enough where we knew we had to talk about both. And that's why equally value results and respect became our foundational principle.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Kristen, one of the things that was so delightful about our book strategist, who said, "This is your title, just stay right here. Compelling, clean, crisp. You have to now justify it and explain it." But we were actually thinking quite a bit about the future of work and looking at different generations in the workplace. And that really hung true, because as you think about autocratic, command and control, old school leadership thinking, Gen Ys and have unfortunately, right, been kind of in the midst of that. The Gen Xers have had to model it, because they were placed into roles by people who expected only that type of leadership philosophy. But the Ys and Zs are not going to put up with that. And so the idea of leaders, I don't care if you really like this change, but this is a significant tidal wave of different generational thinking. And these folks are going to be, Gen Ys and Zs are going to be 66% of the population, of the workplace population in 2030. That's not that far off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I was an advocate for a while. I'm a Gen X, but I was an advocate for a while for the millennials because I was so tired of everyone saying they're so entitled. And like, really, because I can give you millennial after millennial who went in and did great things and challenged the status quo and said we need to talk about purpose and wanted work-life integration. So I'm going to challenge that perspective for you every day. But I think it's going to the mindset and how we're approaching it and the perspective. And if your brain is looking for certain things, it's going to confirm that negative bias if that's what it's looking for. And my experience with all of the generations is that they're all going to have pros and cons. No generation is going to be perfect. And I like, even when you were talking about the different types of leaders, old school, new school, all of that kind of stuff, we saw that there's some strengths and there can also be some gaps that come along with those different leadership styles.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we talk about the culture, I love what you had with it. You have the foundational principle, and then you had the 4 culture cornerstones. So talk to us a little bit about those culture cornerstones and why they're so important. Maybe even talk about, for the audience, most of my leaders are very used to me talking about culture, but even the way you define culture, what that looks like, and then what those cornerstones are and why they're so important.
Sure. Let me start with one that is tied very much to the purpose and significance and meaning kind of connection that literally all humans are of any and all generations are looking for. And it's the idea of servant purpose. It's not just a purpose. And I've been doing this for a little bit longer than Mark, and it's 30 years in my case. And I would get leaders to go out and interview their frontline staff, their mid-level directors and whatnot. In the old days, it was these cameras that you literally had to put on your shoulder, right? Those were VHS kinds of cameras. This was a long time ago. Just go ask, what's the purpose of our company, and tell me what you get. And of course, it was to make money, to satisfy stakeholders. It was to make cars / make sandwiches, whatever the widget is. And leaders realize, well, but we have a charitable arm, and we do this, and we try and cover X benefits. And that's not the messaging. The messaging is make money, make money, make money. And so the servant purpose idea kind of took the mission statement into a slightly different direction, because it's focused upon, this cornerstone asks leaders to formally define how what the company does benefits their community, how it actually impacts quality of life of customers and community. And that's a big jump. That's a significant shift. And so in helping them see, well, number one, if you've got a product that's serving, that's great. But if you never pay attention to how it serves, then you're missing that lever. You're missing that wonderful meaning kind of foundation. So that first cornerstone on servant purpose is to formally define how you benefit others, how you are literally serving others, and then live it, reinforce it, adapt, look for opportunities. And that, leaders will go, well, but the only thing I'm paid to do and paid to pay attention to is results. Well, see what happens of a couple of years of doing service in your community and see how your results change. And they always go up.
Yes.
Mark, want to pick one?
Sure. One of my favorites, and Chris, this is from your original book, The Culture Engine, 2014, was we must measure respect just like we measure results. How many companies create a mission statement or generate a list of core values, and they throw it up on the wall in the lobby and in the conference room, and sometimes even in the bathrooms, and nobody ever lives those things. And so when we talk about equally valuing respect and results, well, Chris is famous for saying we have 8,200 ways of measuring results, right? Every performance indicator in the world, even if it's in a performance evaluation, a flawed system done once a year, right about now, every single year to figure out how much of a merit raise we're going to get next year. Everybody has some way, no matter how archaic or antique it is, to measure performance. But how do we measure respect? How do we measure a human value? And that's the big thing for us. So we suggest to leaders that they define their values by behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And if I demonstrate this specific behavior, and it's observable, then it's measurable. And so we don't just say we want you to create core values. No, underneath that, we want you, for each of the 3 to 5 values you create, we want you to have 3, 4, 5 behaviors that might indicate whether especially leaders are living, modeling, coaching that value. And once we have a human behavior attached to that, now we can measure it. And that's the big one in the book, because it's eye-opening. Chris and I, in our consulting work, we ask leaders to measure themselves, and we ask employees to measure the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And it's eye-opening when that CEO looks and goes, I had no idea people felt that way. And I don't get it, because our About Us page says we're great. Right? So it's an eye-opening experience when leaders are vulnerable enough, open enough to start measuring the level of respect in their current workplace. Yes, they might be a little shocked, but now we know we're going to define ideal. We now have measured current. Well, now what are we going to do to get to ideal? And it's just an eye-opening moment in time for most leaders.
Yeah. And I don't want to miss this one, because it's one I talk about so often with the values. Like they're overarching throughout the company. Some people even have it memorized. I remember one time my husband at one of the companies, he was actually being tested to be able, and I said, okay, great. You can memorize all the values. What does that mean? Tell me what that means. When I hear innovation, tell me what the behaviors are that come along with innovation. He can't answer that question. But the part that was even more demotivating and demoralizing was the fact you would hear the values, and then over and over and over again, the leaders were not using the behaviors that go with those values. So to me, it starts to become a checkbox exercise. You've done the exercise, but you're not doing it. You're not living, breathing, being those values. And now not only, it's almost, I'd rather you not do the exercise and have the values up there, because it almost makes it even worse than when you're actually, at least you haven't done the work yet. You're not there yet.
Yeah, it's very interesting to be able to see employees who know exactly how leaders are behaving. They can see it day in and day out. They can hear the tone. They can see the decision making. And if it's inconsistent with the values and the behaviors, there's no consequence.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, and there's also trust there's also no trust, Chris, if you don't mind me adding on to that. And which segues us pretty nicely actually into the third and fourth cornerstones. Lean in on trust, validation, and growth. Well, if you're not living your values, I don't trust you. And if I don't trust you, I'm not going to give everything to you as an employee or a vendor or a contractor. If I don't trust you, I may be working for a paycheck because I need to pay the mortgage or the rent or whatever, but I'm not going to give you everything, because I'm not going to do that for somebody I don't trust, I don't respect. Right. And then the fourth cornerstone is use your voice for good, which we've already talked about. Well, if you get a CEO up on the pedestal or on the news and he's saying one thing, but living something else, well, that's the definition of a hypocrite. And you know better. You're sitting in your living room watching the news, or you're on your phone on the subway home, and you see your CEO saying these things, but not actually doing them. And all trust is gone. All respect is gone.
Yep. I want to add with the lean on trust, validation, and growth. Validation is such a huge skill that leaders can choose to use. And it's very interesting as we work with leaders and we hopefully help them evolve their work cultures so that those leaders, those senior leaders particularly, because they have to role model this in order for the next level to go, oh, that's what you mean. And oh, you're really serious. And you're going to do a custom value survey where my direct reports give me feedback. Oh God, I have to. But the idea of spotting when people are contributing ideas and efforts and contributions, which happens every day.
Yes.
Maybe even more than once a day.
Yeah.
But here we are in the holiday season. So there's going to be a holiday party and everybody gets a check or a turkey or whatever. And that's the extent of validation. You're missing a huge, huge human lever. And it boosts relationships, which boosts service, which boosts profits. Anyway.
Well, it's so true, because ultimately we all want to be seen and heard. And so when it feels like someone's reflecting back things that you've done, and I a lot of times this shows up in the podcast where I make analogies between raising children and raising employees. I mean, it's the first thing, positive reinforcement. So they know, okay, I'm doing this behavior well, they're going to get more of it. And also, I mean, in the workplace too, who doesn't want to be recognized and acknowledged? I think one of the things I always articulate is be very specific as well, right? Because sometimes it's like, oh, great job. What does that mean exactly? I did a great job. Being very specific around, I really appreciate the way you all came together, spent the 3 hours or rebooked this meeting to get this deadline. Really well done. And being as descriptive even in some of the behaviors they're using.
Yep. I totally agree. It's interesting because the attaboy, attagirls is again, it can be a checking the box, right? So I've now recognized people. I don't have to say anything for a month or a quarter or next year. And it's interesting. I remember with my bosses, the good ones were very specific about their praise, what they were recognizing, because it's I want to do more of that then. But if it's too broad, I'm thinking, well, which of the 4 things did I do in the last hour that really helped the business? And you have no clue. So again, it reduces that respect that I have for that leader. It's fascinating.
Well, and I will tell you, I love the kid analogy, not only because I have 5 kids, but because I've coached baseball for so long, and you can see it in the faces of a young man. He knows maybe a pitcher just had a really bad inning, or somebody made a costly error. Well, they know it already. They know in that moment they kind of sucked. And so on the baseball field and as a dad, I hope I learned this is a really bad time to be a jerk. And one of my assistant coaches one time, we had just a terrible inning. We gave up like 7 runs in 1 inning. And he was just getting more and more and more angry. And as the players finally came off the field, I said, "Great job getting in the dugout. Let's go hit." And he looked at me and goes, "Really? You spun that into a positive?" But that's what leaders need to do sometimes. And to your point, you can't just say "great job," period. Great job. We just gave up seven runs. No, you have to be very specific. Great job getting in the dugout. Now we can go hit. Well, now we have something positive to hang on to, knowing everybody else is already frustrated because they didn't perform well, or they didn't meet that milestone, or the results weren't quite what we wanted from this project or this product. At least now we have something to build on. And that's all by itself, in a strange way, leadership lessons learned from the baseball field. That's exactly how employees want to be treated.
Well, and the other thing that was coming up for me as you were both talking is, depending on the personality styles too, right? Certain personalities, when they just hear "great job," and it doesn't feel like there's a lot of genuineness to what they're talking about, they actually dismiss it. Like they don't really receive it because they just feel like, oh, they're just doing it because they're supposed to do that. Whereas when they're very specific, it feels much more sincere. They're able to receive it. So I think it's really helpful. And like anything, it's remembering it's a work in progress, right? So if I always tell people, sometimes it's just even writing yourself a note, like, I'm going to be working on this particular skill this week or for this month even. And not 5 skills all at once, but 1, so that you can really start to build that muscle. Because anytime you're trying to create behavior change, which I always talk about this too, there's this instant gratification, like it's supposed to happen overnight. That's not how it works, or we'd all be doing it.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to what you've emphasized with the book, which is about respect and results being, in essence, on equal pedestals. And we know that Western society, especially Western industrial age thinking, prevails, and it's results. And so it can be simple for a boss to say, well, in my past, my great bosses all yelled and screamed when we missed the results. So I'm going to yell and scream louder. And it's like, again, we've got new generations coming in, but if you say that respect and results are equally important, then you have to talk about it, model it, coach it, praise it, both at the same time, which means for many, many leaders, it is that mindset shift, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I thought you did really, really well in the book is gave a lot of examples of some companies who are doing it really well and some companies who are not doing so well and struggling. But it wasn't just naming the companies. It got into a lot of detail around, well, the why and what was going on and where were those shortcomings and what could they have done differently. And I think that's so important because I think sometimes when we're having these dialogues and trying to help the decision makers and people who have the resources to be able to invest in this way, they need to have some more really business cases and tactical information and getting again to the results to show what's in it for them ultimately, right? What's in it for them and how's the organization going to shift in positive ways. And I also believe what I've also noticed with a lot of these C-suite in these organizations that seem to also really get this, they've done the work. They've worked with coaches. And so they've gone through their own personal developments journey. And so it's easier for them also to hear some of this and look in the mirror and recognize ways that they might be contributing to this. But I thought it might be helpful for you to share. So I'm just going to give a shout out for the couple that you mentioned that it was great to hear about Radio Flyer, Stryker, In-N-Out Burger, which was cool because we sometimes don't think of that in terms of food services. And then, there's the Boeings of the world. And I thought Ellen DeGeneres, the story you shared there was pretty interesting with the show as well. So I'm going to let you choose one company that's doing it really well that jumps out at you that you'd like to share, what we could all learn from them for this organization and other leaders that are listening right now. And then we'll talk through one that isn't doing it so well and where they might be able to make changes.
So I'll start. Chris found and researched the Cathay Pacific example, the airline that was stuck between the proverbial rock and a hard place. And I caught myself in that example of clearly not a good company, saying, but if I was the CEO as an old white guy, I would have maybe done the same thing, being in that rock and a hard place. My primary interest in that moment, based on my current compensation plan and my current charter, is to protect the company at all costs, people be damned. And then it occurred to me, well, that's actually why we're writing this book, because we don't want leaders to think that their only responsibility is to the shareholders. And you have stakeholders that are far more important than shareholders. And if you, as Chris has already said, if you treat employees, customers, vendors, contractors, competitors even with respect, then that becomes part of your being. Like, and if Cathay Pacific would have had a leadership cycle, a leadership team that would have said, no, wait, we changed our culture 2 years ago. And now we value respect just as much as we do results. And we take just as good a care as stakeholders as we do shareholders. And we would never make that decision now. And that's when it really stuck for me, was those leaders were doing exactly what they felt they had to do based on their charter in that moment. And that's what we're trying to change. If that's your charter, and if you're one of these legacy leaders, been around a long time, and like me, you said, I probably would have done the same thing. That's exactly what we're trying to change here. We're trying to get people to not make those same mistakes again.
Well, and the Radio Flyer example was such a delight to speak with the CEO and the grandson of the founder, Robert Passon. And what really struck it, and we're geeky, I literally once a week will scroll through Glassdoor to look to see who's complaining about whom and how loudly, and is it consistent or is it one, kind of disgruntled player, et cetera. And the Radio Flyer reactions of employees were phenomenal, because it was we can't we can't meet together anymore. This is Chicago based. So everyone, we need to support you with working from home. And do you have internet? Do you have, enough iPads / tablets for your kids going to kindergarten remotely or whatever, right? How do we support that? But the reaction of employees was so gracious to their bosses, to Robert and his leadership team, to say, you guys have done everything and 100 times better than I would have expected from the best organization on the planet, which you now are. And it was so cool to see Robert's response in Glassdoor to say, I can't wait for us all to get back together and see each other and, kind of take this further. So this idea of moving from a literal wagon making company where they built every single wagon out of steel back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and Robert realizing in the 70s and 80s, this is not the way we're going to be able to compete. And so everything is, other plants now build everything. They're doing much, much faster design and testing and whatnot. People love how much they're trusted, how much they're given authority to make decisions, how much they can get creative. So listening to him and his, boy, you talk literally about the leadership mindset and seeing how the business used to be run by his dad and by his dad's dad, and saying that's not going to fly. And they've done a phenomenal job over the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can geek out with you as well. I go on Glassdoor all the time and read those things for the same reason, just to see, what are you hearing about the company? And even when an organization's interested in working with me, I go on there to learn a little bit more about what's happening and taking a pulse. There's lots of different ways you can get awards, from best employers to work and things where you go through to make sure there's different areas. But to hear what the feedback is for people working within the organization, that's the first one that I want to go to get data from.
Well, and if I can give a little bit of insight, one of the things that we do when we begin working with senior leaders is we do discovery. We do interviews, very, very simple. And it's a simple core set of 10 questions we ask not only senior leaders, but next level leaders and periodic team members and even frontline employees. So this is a business, blue collar, in the construction environment. And I was trying to reach a site foreman, and I called this gentleman and he said, can I give you a buzz back? I just had one of my team members throw a ladder at one of his peers. And I thought, take all the time you need, right? And he calls back in 8 minutes and I said, is this? He said, this is blue collar. It's kind of, that talk about old school command and control, disrespect is the foundation. This is the kind of stuff that I have to break these habits of. And I can't be everywhere at once. I've got 4 sites. And it's fascinating to get an insight into that, because sometimes we can read stuff on Glassdoor and go, oh, it's not that bad. It could be.
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of the show is Inspirational Leadership. And to me, inspirational leadership is very reflective of the types of things that you spoke about in your book and those behaviors. But I really liked when you also there's a part of the book where you would talk about leadership styles, old school, new school, middle school. And then you were talking about another one, which I think is important. And I want to discuss with you a little bit right now as well, which is around the boomer male syndrome. And I don't know, did you create that term? Because did you coin it?
We did, and it actually came out very spontaneously. I was having a very frustrating conversation with a white male older leader, and he was I don't know, auditioning for the poster child of boomer male syndrome in the minute. And just to give you an example, when I said, look, we have all this data now from your employees, from your vendors, from your contractors, it's not positive. And you were put in this position to help make the culture better, but the data shows it's actually gotten much worse. And he goes, well, we can't pay any attention to that. We gave them a voice and all they did is bitch. And I went, oh my God, you are like the epitome of a boomer male right now. This is not okay. And from that tense conversation came the phrase boomer male syndrome, to the point Chris and I actually sat down and wrote, what are the symptoms? What are the cures? I mean, and we put some of that in the book to let people know that one, you don't have to be male and you don't have to be old to be suffering from boomer male syndrome or BMS. And we got a very good story firsthand from one of our interviewees of the book. She said she is a 40s, Chris, Black female.
She would appreciate the 40s reference.
Okay. And she said, look, I get this. I get that. I know you don't want to label people. I know you don't want to, target a certain sector of the leadership core. And we especially don't want to do that because we wrote this book for leaders and we wouldn't want to alienate 76% of our audience. But she said, I'm suffering from BMS, and I'll tell you why. Because all the old white guys in the boardroom, they turned me into an old white guy. I had to be an old white guy to be heard, to be respected, to get assignments. I had to change. And so she is probably the best example, self-described as a Black female leader suffering from BMS, because that's what she had to do to fit in, to be relevant, to become relevant. And so it's a tough thing. Now, again, it's usually the older white guys. They've been around forever. They only know how to lead one way. They focus exclusively on results, which is why things like, I'm going to lay off people and then collect my $41 million end of year bonus thing happens, right? Those are the people we're talking about. But even there, and Chris and I have seen this firsthand over the last couple of years, especially with COVID, because those leaders, they went home too. They could take care of their elderly parents. They could welcome their kid back from college. They could visit with their grandchildren. They could take care of their four-legged children. And they got this sense of normalcy. Like, I don't have to be going 80, 90, 120 hours a week and expect the same from my people. I want to live my life now. I'm getting older and I like to be in there for my grandkids. So there's this pandemic caused epiphany happening where even those who really suffered most from BMS are now reflecting and acting and are inspired to do something different, and not just for them, but their entire companies. Now, unfortunately, this isn't true on Wall Street yet. It isn't true in the hospitality industry yet. There's certain sectors where they're not going to change and BMS is going to remain very real. But Chris and I are seeing example after example after example of the most encased boomer male leaders saying, enough's enough. I'm going to change now.
And it's hard to change. It is looking at decades of reinforcement, right? And it's not just messaging, it's pay, it's incentives, it's recognition. And so the concept that anybody can be a boomer male syndrome sufferer, and all you've got to do is start to look at what's the impact. Are we actually, does good comes first? Are we literally helping employees experience every day respect and validation for their ideas, efforts, and contributions? And the answer is or oh my God, no, then that's where you have to change. And again, culture change takes some time. There's some tricks to doing it well. And we literally give away our secrets because we want leaders to take this on, and you can start small and you can really make impact. But the trick is, if you start down this path and you're going to literally make respect as important as results, you better start looking at awards that are given out, the kinds of validating messaging for demeaning behaviors. There's got to be consequences for that. So you have to measure, and then you have to coach, and then you have to hope people evolve. And if they don't evolve, then you come to a line in the sand. And if you're tolerating people behaving badly, you're not going to get the good comes first culture.
I It's the brilliant a-holes. You can't let the brilliant a-holes continue to behave like that and think that you're going to create that culture. It's not possible. They have to be accountability. And I like how you said that there's a line and you have to draw the line and say, this will no longer be tolerated.
Yeah. Because if you don't make that change, then everything on the walls and all of this quote communication about the positive, productive, respectful culture is crap.
Totally. So Chris and Mark, I'm going to give each of you a magic wand, and you get to take this magic wand, and with that, maybe you say one thing, a couple of things. If I gave you that magic wand and there's something that you want to do to make change, and you had the ability to do it in any capacity, what shows up for you? It can be in workplaces, it could be in the world, it could be in your communities, whatever's showing up for each of you in this moment.
Well, besides, I'm hoping the Giants sign a frontline pitcher for the next season.
Of course.
I have worked very hard. So has Chris in helping leaders understand. And we'll start with managers, the different tiers of leadership. And we talk in the book the difference between a manager and a leader, and then a leader to a mentor. And our biggest light bulb moment so far is when leaders sit there and go, I'm definitely focused on compliance and conformity, and I'm definitely focused on results and shareholder value. And I have to stop. I have to start being a mentor. I have to, and I'm not just talking about succession plan stuff. I'm talking about, one of our cornerstones, leaning on personal and professional growth. We have to help those around us excel. And if we're not doing that for any reason, we're by definition, we're not being a mentor. And so if I had a magic wand, it would be to take every manager and make them feel like they are a leader now. I'm not so focused on compliance and conformity. I'm going to focus on the mission. I'm going to inspire action. I'm going to get the most out of my people. That's a leader. And then a mentor is that plus somebody who genuinely believes in the potential and is willing to invest time in the possibilities of that individual, their growth, their success. And my magic wand would be all about mentorship.
So good.
Let me jump in with mine. I think one of the interesting life experiences I had early on, my dad, who was a mortgage banker back then, and as I was watching Rocky and Bullwinkle, I'm old, right? Snidely Whiplash was the mortgage holder, right? In this old 50s cartoon. I'm really old. So I thought, my dad isn't exactly a Snidely Whiplash. But my mother apparently coached my father. So when I hit kindergarten, we joined a YMCA program that was very common throughout Southern California called Indian Guides. And there was Indian princesses, Indian maidens, et cetera, but it was fathers and sons. And so we joined another dozen. And these businessmen would get dressed up with their, vests and kind of engage in some rituals that were literally about building their relationship with their kids. Well, I went through through high school with the same kids because we all went into the next, elementary school was a different kind of program, more sports oriented, yada, yada, yada. But what it did was allow me to choose, instead of following in my father's footsteps and going to work for him as a mortgage banker, I went the complete opposite way. I went the kumbaya way, guitars in front of the campfire, driving buses, doing caravans and open, flatbed trucks kinds of things, and traveling all over. And so that nonprofit executive thing, I was in the YMCA for 15 years, but it's the community orientation. So my magic wand would be, we need, and we mentioned it in the book, we talk about barn building, about the ideal that if you begin implementing some of these concepts in your work life, it's going to impact your personal life, which means you need to get off of your butt and meet your neighbors and engage with your neighbors, and maybe even contribute on a regular basis with a local nonprofit. And it doesn't mean you have to be out building houses, although Habitat for Humanity would love your help. But if we don't do that kind of face-to-face, literal hours of volunteering to serve others, then I think we're going to continue to be in a pretty divisive society in the years to come. So that's my one.
Both so good. I think it reminds me, as you're saying that too, that people can get so me focused that they forget the we focus, and it shifts your perspective when you're around other people and volunteering in your community in that way. Everything looks different.
Yeah, it really does. And it's right out there. It's not complex. There's
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits that could use our help today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Chris and Mark, where can people learn more about you and the work that you're doing in the world?
We are active on social, but I think we would be doing you all a disservice. If you want to learn more about us and about the book, go to goodcomesfirst.com.
And Mark, anything you want to add to that? Anywhere else where you might be playing out there with your company that you would like people to check out as well?
Well, I think people will see, as Chris said, we are active on social. Neither one of us have admins or executive assistants. We answer our own emails and tweets, and we believe that's really important to having our fingers on the pulse of what's happening in the workplace right now. So if you want to talk to us directly, besides goodcomesfirst.com and authors at goodcomesfirst.com, you can reach us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. We're there.
Perfect. Thank you, both of you, for being here today and creating this wonderful book that's, I think, going to help to create very big shifts in the world.
We're really hopeful for that. And Kristen, thank you for reading the book and preparing some cool questions. You're just passionate about work culture as we are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. And to everybody, wherever you are in the world right now, sending lots of love.